The courtroom in Dallas County fell so quiet that even the sound of a chair moving made people turn their heads. Vivian stood before the judge, her hands steady, her face calm. "You are hereby sentenced." The words echoed across the room. A few people lowered their heads. Others exchanged uneasy looks. Nobody smiled. Nobody celebrated, because almost everyone sitting inside that courtroom remembered a different Vivian. A woman near the back whispered to her husband, "Isn't she the lady who organized those Thanksgiving food drives every year?" He nodded slowly. "I remember. She helped my sister after she lost her job." Another voice quietly joined in. "My mother still talks about how Vivian stayed after church to help. Seniors understand their bills." The whispers spread from one row to another. "They're saying she committed financial fraud." "I don't believe it." "Neither do I." The officer stepped closer, waiting for the judge to finish. Vivian heard every word. She didn't interrupt, she didn't argue, she didn't cry. Instead, she smiled. It wasn't a smile of victory. It wasn't a smile because she accepted what was happening. It was the smile of someone refusing to let injustice decide who she was. Across the courtroom sat one empty chair. Only minutes earlier, Anderson had been sitting there, her former husband, the man who once promised they would build a life together. The man who looked concerned whenever reporters pointed cameras his way. The man who spoke softly enough to sound caring whenever someone asked about Vivian. But before the hearing even ended, he quietly stood up, straightened his expensive suit, walked toward the exit, and never looked back. He didn't wait to hear the sentence. He didn't wait to see Vivian escorted away. He acted like someone leaving a meeting that had gone exactly as planned. Vivian watched the courtroom door close behind him. For just a second, sadness crossed her face. Not because she still loved him, but because she finally understood how completely he had erased the life they once shared. She took a slow breath, soft enough that almost nobody heard her. "I hope one day the truth finds you." The officer beside her gently motioned toward the security door. Vivian nodded politely. She walked forward without lowering her dignity. Every step echoed through the silent courtroom. Nobody clapped, nobody spoke. The heavy steel door opened. She crossed the doorway and disappeared from sight. Before we continue, may God bless every person watching today. May your home be filled with peace, your hard work be rewarded, and may truth always speak louder than lies in your life. If you're waiting for better days, may they come sooner than you expect. Amen. Welcome to Love, Money, and Secret, where America's greatest stories and life lessons meet creativity and heart. If you're new to the family, we're grateful to have you here. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring more unforgettable stories your way. And before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing our family joining us from across America and around the world. Please take a second to like this video and leave a comment. Those small actions help YouTube share these stories with many more people. Several miles away from that courthouse, another decision was being celebrated. On the top floor of a glass office tower overlooking downtown Dallas, executives filled a polished conference room with applause. A giant screen displayed numbers climbing higher than anyone had expected. One executive grinned. "We did it." Another leaned across the table. "This acquisition is going to change the company." A third laughed. "Scott, you've done it again." Every face turned toward the man sitting at the head of the table. Scott, the billionaire everyone expected to smile. The billionaire everyone expected to thank the board. The billionaire everyone believed had everything. Instead, Scott quietly looked out the window. Cars moved through downtown traffic. People crossed busy intersections carrying coffee, backpacks, grocery bags, and briefcases. From that height, none of them knew another multi-million-dollar deal had just been approved. None of them cared. One executive cleared his throat. "Scott?" He turned back. "Yes? Aren't you going to say something?" Scott offered a small smile. "I'm glad the team's hard work paid off." The room applauded again. Another executive joked. "That's all? We expected a speech." Scott chuckled softly. "I think you've already heard enough speeches from me." Laughter filled the room. Someone raised a glass of sparkling water. "To another successful year." Everyone joined the toast. Scott lifted his glass too, but his thoughts were somewhere else. The celebration felt familiar, too familiar. Every quarter brought another company, another investment, another congratulatory dinner, another headline. Yet every achievement seemed to disappear as quickly as it arrived. His assistant stepped quietly into the room. "Scott, sorry to interrupt." "It's all right." "You have a call from the director of your community foundation." Scott glanced around the table. "Give me 1 minute." He stepped into the hallway and answered. "Good afternoon." The director's cheerful voice came through the phone. "I hope I'm not interrupting your celebration." Scott smiled. "You probably are." "I'll make it quick. What do you have?" "We've been reviewing reports from one of the correctional reentry programs we support." Scott listened patiently. They keep mentioning the same person. Who? A woman named Vivian. Scott frowned slightly. What about her? There was a brief pause. The volunteers say she spent her time helping other women understand budgeting, credit reports, and financial planning. Scott leaned against the hallway window. Inside the facility? Yes. He looked thoughtful. Go on. They also say she organized reading groups and helped women prepare for job interviews after release. Scott remained silent. The director continued. Honestly, I've never seen volunteers agree this strongly about one person. What do they say? They all describe her the same way. Scott's curiosity grew, which is, they don't believe she ever belonged there. Those 7 words settled heavily in his mind, not because they proved anything, but because they came from people who had nothing to gain by saying them. Scott had built companies by paying attention to patterns. When one person spoke, he listened. When several unrelated people reached the same conclusion without knowing each other, he paid much closer attention. He looked back through the conference room glass. Executives were still smiling over profits. Yet for some reason, the conversation waiting on the other end of his phone suddenly felt far more important. He answered without hesitation. Send me everything you have on Vivian. I'll have the file on your desk before the day is over. Scott ended the call. For a moment, he stood quietly overlooking the Dallas skyline. He had no idea that one ordinary file was about to connect his life with a woman whose name he had never heard before. And once that happened, neither of their lives would ever be the same. Late that afternoon, a slim folder was placed on Scott's desk. It looked no different from the dozens of reports he received every week. Property proposals, investment summaries, charity requests, legal updates. He could have opened any of those first. Instead, his hand reached for the folder labeled with one name. Vivian. He opened it. The first page summarized the court's decision. The second outlined the financial charges. Everything appeared organized. Everything appeared convincing. But Scott had learned long ago that paperwork could tell only part of a story. He kept reading. Soon, the official documents gave way to something very different. Handwritten letters, volunteer reports, notes from counselors, testimonials from women whose lives had crossed Vivian's path. One letter read, "She taught me how to make my first budget instead of giving up on myself." Another said, "When everyone else complained, Vivian kept telling us that one mistake, or even one accusation, didn't have to define the rest of our lives." Scott turned another page. A counselor had written, "If our neighborhoods had more people willing to explain money the way Vivian does, many families would avoid serious financial problems." He paused. That sentence stayed with him. The official record described someone who had committed a serious financial crime. These letters described someone who patiently helped strangers understand money so they wouldn't make costly mistakes. Those two pictures refused to fit together. Scott closed the folder for a moment. He wasn't thinking about sympathy. He wasn't thinking about charity. He was thinking about consistency. Character has a way of revealing itself over time. A dishonest person can pretend for a little while, but keeping dozens of unrelated people convinced of your kindness through difficult circumstances is much harder. He picked up the phone. His legal counsel answered almost immediately. "Good afternoon, Scott. I needed an independent review." "Of what?" "A closed financial case." There was a brief silence. "You don't usually involve yourself in criminal matters." "I know. So why this one?" Scott glanced once more at Vivian's file. "Because something doesn't add up. You believe she may be innocent? I don't know. And if the court reached the right decision, then the review confirms it. And if they didn't?" Scott answered without hesitation. "Then someone deserves another chance to be heard." The attorney smiled softly on the other end. "I'll assemble a team. Keep it quiet. No media? No public statements? No, just facts." Scott nodded, even though nobody could see him. "Facts are enough." He ended the call. Outside his office window, Dallas carried on with another ordinary evening. Traffic filled the streets, restaurants welcomed dinner guests, families gathered around their tables. Somewhere across the city, Vivian was trying to rebuild a life that had been taken from her. She had no idea a complete stranger had just decided to search for the truth. She had no idea that a single decision made in a quiet office would become the first step toward restoring her name and opening the door to a future she no longer believed was possible. But before truth could set Vivian free, before Scott and Vivian would ever meet, before justice could finally catch the man who believed he had gotten away with everything, we have to go back to the days before the courtroom, back to the days before the accusations, back to the marriage that began with love, laughter, and simple dreams. Because that is where this story truly begins. Long before Vivian stood in a Dallas County courtroom, she was known in southern Dallas for something simple. She showed up. If church volunteers needed extra hands on Saturday morning, Vivian was there before the coffee finished brewing. If a family needed help sorting bills, she brought a folder, a pen, and enough patience to explain everything twice. If Thanksgiving food baskets needed organizing, she stayed until the last canned good was packed. Her neighborhood was not rich, but it was full of people who knew how to carry one another. On warm weekends, neighbors gathered in backyards while music played softly and children ran between folding chairs. Someone always brought ribs. Someone else brought potato salad. Somebody's auntie always claimed the dessert table before anyone could stop her. Vivian loved those moments, not because life was easy, because people still made room for joy. One Saturday, while helping at a church food drive, an older neighbor watched Vivian arranging grocery bags by family size. "Baby, you've been working since morning," the woman said. "Sit down before your knees start sending complaints." Vivian laughed. "My knees are fine. That's what knees say before they betray you." Vivian shook her head, smiling. "Let me finish these bags first." "You always helping somebody." Vivian tied one bag and placed it beside the others. "Somebody helped me too. That's how this works." That was how she lived. During the week, Vivian worked at a small financial services office not far from her neighborhood. Most of the people who came in were not wealthy clients with investment accounts. They were parents trying to fix credit, seniors confused by payment notices, workers trying to stretch one paycheck across too many bills. Vivian never made them feel ashamed. One afternoon, an elderly customer sat across from her with a stack of papers and worry written across his face. "I don't understand half these numbers," he admitted. Vivian pulled the papers closer. "That's all right. Numbers only look scary until somebody explains them properly." He sighed. "You sure?" "I'm sure. We're going to take this one line at a time." After 20 minutes, his shoulders relaxed. "So I'm not ruined?" "No, sir, you're not ruined. You just need a payment plan and a little patience." He smiled for the first time that day. "You make it sound possible." It is possible. People trusted Vivian because she did not talk down to them. She listened first. She explained second. She made hard things feel manageable. At home, she kept a small notebook filled with reminders for people she wanted to check on. A neighbor recovering from surgery. A church member looking for work. A young mother trying to understand rent assistance paperwork. To Vivian, kindness was not weakness. It was discipline. It was choosing to care even when nobody was watching. And that was the Vivian everyone knew. The woman who helped others stand. The woman who believed honesty could protect a life. The woman who had no idea that the very trust she gave so freely would soon be used against her. The first year of Vivian and Anderson's marriage felt exactly the way they had hoped it would. They rented a modest apartment on the southern side of Dallas. The furniture didn't match perfectly. The kitchen was small. The bedroom window looked out toward a parking lot instead of a beautiful view. Neither of them cared. To Vivian, home wasn't measured by square footage. It was measured by peace. Most evenings they cooked dinner together. Sometimes Anderson insisted he could prepare something special. Most of the time, Vivian ended up rescuing the meal. One evening, he proudly placed a pan on the stove. "I've got this," he announced. Vivian folded her arms with a smile. "You said that last time." "And?" "You almost burned the skillet." "I prefer to say I seasoned it." She laughed. "That's a very creative way to describe smoke." He pointed the spatula toward her. "You laugh now, but dinner is going to surprise you." 20 minutes later, the smoke detector proved him wrong. Vivian covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. "I told you. I was experimenting." "You were experimenting with the fire department." They both laughed until tears filled their eyes. Those ordinary evenings became some of Vivian's favorite memories. They talked about saving enough money to buy a small house one day. Nothing extravagant, just a place with a little backyard where friends from church could gather after Sunday service. A place where children could run freely during family cookouts. A place that felt welcoming. At first, Anderson agreed with those dreams. "I'll work hard," he told her one evening. "We'll get there. I know we will." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We don't have to rush. We're already building something good." He smiled. Back then, he meant it. But as the months passed, small changes quietly entered their marriage. Whenever one of Anderson's friends bought a newer truck, he talked about it for days. Whenever social media showed expensive vacations or luxury homes, he stared at the pictures longer than before. One Saturday afternoon, they attended a neighborhood barbecue. People laughed, children played basketball nearby, and older neighbors argued playfully over whose ribs deserved the most praise. Vivian looked completely at home. She greeted almost everyone by name. She asked about sick relatives. She congratulated young people preparing for college. She helped refill drinks without anyone asking. Anderson stood beside her for a while before checking his watch. "Ready to go?" he asked. She looked surprised. "We just got here. We've been here almost 2 hours." She smiled. "I've spent more time waiting at the DMV." He chuckled politely. I still don't understand how people can stay at one cookout all afternoon. Vivian laughed. Because they're not just eating. What are they doing? They're catching up. They can do that over the phone. It isn't the same. She looked around at the families talking together. Some people need to be seen, not just called. Anderson shrugged. I guess. As they drove home, the conversation faded. It wasn't an argument, just a quiet difference in the way they viewed life. Those moments became more frequent. Dinner conversations slowly changed. Instead of talking about future family plans, Anderson talked about money. Instead of discussing community projects, he compared himself to people who seemed wealthier. One evening, he tossed his phone onto the couch. I went to school with a guy who just bought a 6-figure sports car. Vivian looked up from the paperwork she had brought home. Good for him. You don't think we're falling behind? She smiled gently. Behind who? Everybody. There will always be somebody with more. And that's supposed to make me feel better? No. She closed the folder and looked at him. It's supposed to remind you that peace doesn't come with a price tag. He leaned back. Sometimes I think you dream too small. I don't. I dream differently. He frowned. I want us to be successful. So do I. I just don't want success to cost us our honesty. The room became quiet. For several seconds, Anderson said nothing. Finally, he stood and picked up his car keys. I've got a meeting. At this hour? It won't take long, she nodded. Drive safely. I will. After the front door closed, Vivian returned to her paperwork. She trusted her husband completely. She believed the late meetings were part of his growing business. Opportunities. She believed the extra documents he carried home were ordinary. Business records. She believed the signatures he occasionally asked about had perfectly reasonable explanations. She never questioned him. Not because she wasn't careful. Because she believed marriage depended on trust. What Vivian could not see was that Anderson had already begun handling important financial paperwork without telling her. Little by little, he started placing documents in front of her during busy evenings. Just one signature, he would say casually. It's routine. Other times he handled paperwork entirely on his own while using information that belonged to her. Each decision seemed small. Each step appeared harmless. Together, they quietly became the beginning of the betrayal that would one day place Vivian inside a Dallas County courtroom, fighting to prove she had never committed the crime that carried her name. The first warning arrived through a letter Vivian almost threw away. It came in a plain envelope, folded between grocery coupons and a church announcement. She opened it while standing in the small kitchen. After work, expecting another routine notice, instead her eyes stopped on words that made no sense. Past due balance, business loan, final notice. Vivian read it twice, then a third time. Her name was printed clearly at the top. She frowned and called toward the living room. Anderson? He looked up from his phone. Yeah? Do you know anything about a business loan in my name? For half a second, his expression changed. Only half a second. Then he stood calmly and took the paper. Let me see. Vivian watched his face. What is this? He shook his head. Probably a mistake. A mistake with my full name on it? Companies send wrong notices all the time. This says I signed paperwork. He gave a small laugh. Vivian, you work around financial documents. Every day. You know errors happen. She wanted to believe that. So she did. But more letters came, then phone calls, then a notice connected to a business filing she had never approved. Each time Vivian asked questions, Anderson had an answer. I'll check on it. I know someone who can clear it up. Don't stress yourself. You're overthinking. The more he comforted her, the less peace she felt. Soon, 2 investigators visited her workplace. Vivian sat across from them with her hands folded tightly in her lap while they placed documents on the table. Is this your signature? Vivian stared at the page. It looked like hers. Almost exactly, but she had no memory of signing it. I didn't sign this, she said. One investigator pointed to another document. What about this loan application? I've never seen that before. And this business account? No, her voice shook. I help people fix problems like this. I would never do this. At home that evening, Anderson wrapped his arms around her while she cried. We'll get through it, he said softly. Vivian looked up at him. You believe me, right? Of course. But while Vivian leaned on him, Anderson was already protecting himself. In public, he acted like the wounded former husband standing beside a woman in trouble. At church, he lowered his voice and told people he was praying for clarity. Outside hearings, he touched Vivian's shoulder just long enough for others to see. Neighbors did not believe the accusations. A church mother hugged Vivian tightly after one hearing. Baby, we know your heart. Vivian swallowed hard. I wish the court knew it too. Another neighbor shook his head. This doesn't sound like you. It isn't me, Vivian whispered, but the evidence looked neat, too neat. Documents carried her name. Loans pointed to her identity, business filings connected back to her information. By the time the court hearings began, Vivian felt trapped inside a story. Someone else had written with her name on every page, and Anderson sat close enough to look supportive, while quietly making sure the blame never reached him. The day the sentence was announced, Vivian felt as though time had stopped. She had spent months believing that once every document was examined, someone would notice the truth. Someone would realize she had never opened those accounts. Someone would recognize that she had never benefited from the money connected to the case. Instead, the court accepted the evidence placed before it. When the hearing ended, Vivian stood quietly while the officers prepared to escort her away. She looked once toward the gallery. Many of the faces staring back at her were wet with tears. Church members who had prayed with her, neighbors who had watched her grow up, people who had shared meals with her at community cookouts. They couldn't change the outcome, but they refused to turn their backs on her. As Vivian walked past them, one elderly church mother reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "We'll keep praying." Vivian managed a small smile. "I know you will." Another neighbor called softly, "We'll be here when you come home." She nodded without speaking. Those words stayed with her long after the courtroom doors closed behind her, overnight. Within weeks, everything she had worked so hard to build disappeared. Her employer could no longer keep her position open. The apartment she had proudly called home was gone. Most of her belongings had to be packed away or given up. The reputation she had spent years earning disappeared almost. Yet one thing remained untouched: her character. When Vivian entered the correctional facility, she made a decision. Before the first week had ended, if she could not change where she was, she could still decide who she would be. She noticed several women struggling to complete simple employment forms. Others became frustrated whenever financial paperwork was placed in front of them. One afternoon, a woman pushed a resume across the table. "I don't even know where to start." Vivian pulled up a chair. "Let's do it together. You'd really help me?" "Of course." "I thought you'd want to be left alone." Vivian smiled. "We've all got enough problems already. We don't need to face them by ourselves." Soon, one resume became 3. 3 became 10. Every week, Vivian gathered small groups during free time. Some wanted help understanding budgeting. Others wanted to learn how to read credit reports. Several simply wanted someone patient enough to explain official forms without making them feel embarrassed. Vivian never hurried anyone. "If you don't understand something," she would say, "ask again. Learning isn't a race." The women began encouraging one another. Even some correctional officers noticed the difference. One afternoon, after another budgeting session had ended, a woman remained behind. She looked at Vivian for a long moment before speaking. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you keep helping everybody?" Vivian looked up from the notebook she was closing. "Because somebody always needs hope." The woman slowly shook her head. "No, I mean, after everything that's happened to you." Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she answered gently. "Kindness isn't a loan." The woman frowned. "What do you mean?" "It doesn't depend on whether people pay it back." She closed the notebook and smiled. "If I stop being the person I believe in because life treated me unfairly, then I've lost something far more valuable than my freedom." The woman lowered her eyes. "I never thought about it that way." Vivian stood and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "One day we'll both walk out of here. When that day comes, I want us to leave carrying better habits than the ones that brought us here." Word spread through the housing unit. Before long, more women joined the classes. Some arrived to learn about money. Others came because, for the first time in a long while, they felt someone believed they could still build an honest future. Without realizing it, Vivian was doing exactly what she had always done in her neighborhood before her life changed. She was helping people stand again. She still had no idea that beyond those walls, a quiet businessman named Scott was only weeks away from hearing her name for the very first time. Scott's life in Dallas looked like everything most people dreamed about. His office sat high above downtown, with conference rooms full of glass walls, polished tables, and screens showing numbers that moved faster than most people could read. His name appeared in business magazines. His companies owned properties, technology investments, and partnerships across Texas. Every week brought another meeting, every month brought another celebration, every year brought more money. Yet Scott often left those rooms feeling strangely tired. One Monday morning, executives gathered around a long table while a presentation played on the wall. "This expansion could increase revenue by 20%, one executive said. Another added, "If we close before the next quarter, the board will love it." Scott nodded, but his eyes drifted toward the window. Below him, Dallas moved with ordinary life. Delivery drivers stopped at curbs. Office workers hurried with coffee. A mother held her child's hand while crossing the street. None of them knew his name. For some reason, that felt peaceful. "Scott?" an executive asked. He turned back. "Yes? Do we have your approval?" Scott looked at the numbers again. "Move forward, but make sure the employee transition plan is fair." The room became quiet for a second. One executive smiled. "You always ask about that." Scott stood. "Because people are not furniture. We don't just move them around." No one argued. They knew that tone. After the meeting, his assistant reminded him about the rest of his schedule. "Private lunch at the club, charity gala planning call, golf fundraiser this weekend." Scott gave a tired smile. "So, the usual, the successful usual." He chuckled. "That sounds better than it feels." Later that afternoon, while Scott reviewed another contract, his phone rang. The caller was the director of a community foundation he funded quietly across Dallas. Scott answered. "Good afternoon." "Scott, I know you're busy, but something unusual came up." "What happened?" "We received several reports from a correctional reentry program." Scott leaned back. "Are they requesting more support?" "Not exactly. The program is doing well, but volunteers keep mentioning one woman." Scott picked up a pen. "What woman?" "Her name is Vivian." The name meant nothing to him yet. "What about her?" "She recently completed time connected to a financial crime, but inside she helped other women prepare resumes, understand budgets, and read financial documents." Scott's expression changed. "Financial documents?" "Yes, that's what caught my attention too." The director continued carefully. "Several women said Vivian taught them how to avoid bad loans, organize bills, and rebuild credit. One volunteer said she explained money better than some paid counselors." Scott sat forward. "And she was jailed for a financial crime?" "That's what the record says." "What do the volunteers say?" A brief silence followed. "They don't believe she belonged there." Scott did not answer immediately. He had heard many emotional stories through charity work, but this felt different. Not because it was dramatic, because it did not match itself. A woman accused of financial dishonesty had spent her hardest days, teaching others how to handle money honestly. That contradiction bothered him. "Send me everything available," Scott said. "I'll have it delivered today." No press, no announcement. Of course. Scott ended the call and looked down at Dallas again. A few minutes earlier, his day had been another routine schedule of deals and polished conversations. Now one name stayed in his mind. Vivian. And for the first time that week, Scott felt like something on his desk might truly matter. Late that afternoon, a slim folder was delivered to Scott's office. His assistant placed it neatly beside several contracts waiting for his signature. "These need your approval before 5, she said, pointing to the contracts. Scott nodded. "And this?" "The information you requested." She quietly left the office. For a moment, Scott looked at the stack of business documents, a hotel acquisition, a technology investment, a commercial property proposal. Normally, those files would have come first. Instead, he reached for the folder marked with one name. Vivian. He opened it. The first pages summarized the court proceedings. Loan documents, business filings, financial records. On the surface, the case looked complete. The paperwork appeared organized. The signatures seemed convincing. If someone only read those pages, the conclusion looked straightforward. Scott continued reading. The next section contained letters collected by volunteers from the reentry program. One woman wrote, "Vivian spent hours helping me understand how to manage my money before I went home. She never made me feel embarrassed for asking questions." Another letter read, "When I thought nobody would hire me again, Vivian helped me write my first resume. She kept telling me one difficult season didn't have to decide the rest of my life." Scott turned another page. A volunteer had written, "She always reminded people that honesty becomes easier when you understand your finances." He slowly placed the paper back on the desk. Something refused to fit. The court records described someone who had committed financial misconduct. The personal letters described someone who patiently taught financial responsibility to complete strangers. He had built successful companies by noticing patterns. When different people, who had no reason to coordinate their stories, described the same character traits, he paid attention. Scott picked up the phone. His legal counsel answered. "Good afternoon, Scott. I need an independent review. Of the Vivian case?" "Yes." The attorney paused briefly. "The case has already been decided." "I know. So what exactly are you looking for?" "The truth." Another short silence followed. "You believe the court was wrong?" "I don't know. I believe the facts deserve another careful look." The attorney replied calmly. "We'll examine everything from the beginning. Don't assume she's innocent. We won't. And don't assume she's guilty because someone already reached that conclusion. We'll follow the evidence." "Exactly." Over the next several weeks, the legal team quietly reviewed every available record. No reporters were contacted. No public statements were released. The work happened behind closed office doors. As more documents were examined, small inconsistencies began appearing. Several transaction dates conflicted with Vivian's documented work schedule. A closer review showed unusual similarities across signatures that deserved further examination. Financial records revealed that nearly every questionable transfer ultimately benefited businesses connected to one person, Anderson. The attorney returned to Scott's office carrying several organized folders. "We found enough to ask serious questions." Scott looked up immediately. "What kind of questions?" "The financial trail doesn't stop with Vivian." He opened one folder. "It keeps leading back to Anderson." Scott remained quiet while reviewing the documents. Finally, he closed the folder. "If the evidence continues supporting this," the attorney finished his sentence. "We'll move to reopen the case." Scott nodded. "Do it. No interviews, no publicity, no celebration," the attorney smiled. "Just facts. Just facts. Before we continue, we'd love to hear from you. Do you believe the truth always finds its way to the light, even when it takes years? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. If you're hoping justice is finally coming for Vivian, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Love, Money, and Secret so you never miss the next story." As Scott looked once more at Vivian's file, he had no idea that his decision would soon restore a woman's name and quietly change his own life forever. When Vivian came home, freedom did not feel as simple as she had once imagined. The first morning after her release, she woke before sunrise, sat on the edge of the bed, and listened to the quiet. No doors locking, no loud instructions, no schedule decided by someone else. For a moment, she smiled. Then reality entered the room. She still needed work. She still needed a stable place of her own. She still had a record connected to a crime she knew she never committed. Vivian refused to waste the day feeling sorry for herself. She pressed her clothes, packed a small folder with her resume, and took the bus to her first interview. The manager seemed friendly at first. "You have experience with financial records?" he asked. "Yes," Vivian said. "Budgeting, payment plans, credit repair, customer support. I've worked with families who needed simple explanations for complicated problems." "That's useful," Vivian allowed herself to hope. 2 days later, the email came. "Thank you for your interest, but we have chosen another candidate." The next interview ended the same way. So did the one after that. Each time the conversation started warmly. Each time the background check changed the mood. One manager lowered his voice after stepping out to review her file. "Vivian, I appreciate your honesty, but this position handles sensitive financial information." She swallowed carefully. "I understand. I'm sorry." She nodded. "Thank you for seeing me." Outside, she stood near the bus stop and gripped her folder tightly. She had survived being locked away, yet walking out of another failed interview almost broke her. That evening, she returned to her church community tired but not defeated. Several women were arranging food after a prayer meeting. One of them looked at her face and said, "Come sit down." Vivian tried to smile. "I'm all right." "Nobody asked if you were all right. I said sit down." A plate appeared in front of her before she could object. Vivian looked at it and laughed softly. "Y'all feed people like it's a legal requirement." "It should be," the woman replied. For the first time that day, Vivian laughed from her chest. The community did not let her carry shame alone. They prayed with her, shared groceries, gave her rides to interviews, and reminded her that a record could speak loudly, but it could not tell the whole truth. A few days later, Vivian received a call from her attorney. "Can you come to the office tomorrow morning?" Vivian's heart tightened. "Is something wrong?" "No," he said, his voice brighter than usual. "Something may finally be right." The next morning, Vivian arrived nervous and cautious. She expected another delay, another form, another explanation for why nothing could be done. Instead, her attorney placed several folders on the table. "Vivian, someone funded an independent review of your case." She stared at him. "Someone? Yes? Who?" "We'll discuss that soon, but first, you need to see this." He opened the first folder and turned it toward her. "There are records that were not properly examined, dates that don't line up, transactions that benefited Anderson more than anyone realized, and there may be proof that you could not have signed some of these documents." Vivian covered her mouth. For months she had begged people to look closer. Now someone finally had. Her eyes filled, but she did not sob loudly. She simply lowered her head as tears fell onto her hands. Her attorney spoke gently. "This is not over yet, but hope is back on the table." Vivian wiped her face and looked at the documents. For the first time in a long time, her future did not feel locked behind someone else's lie. 2 days later, Vivian returned to her attorney's office in downtown Dallas. This time, she walked in carrying more than her folder. She carried cautious hope. She had spent so many months hearing bad news that she no longer expected life to surprise her in a good way. The receptionist smiled warmly. "They're ready for you." Vivian thanked her and followed the hallway toward a conference room. When she opened the door, she noticed someone standing quietly near the window. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He simply watched the morning traffic moving through downtown Dallas. Her attorney entered behind her. "Vivian, please come in." She stepped forward. "There is someone I'd like you to meet." The man turned around. He offered a calm smile. "Good morning." "Good morning," Vivian replied politely. Her attorney looked between them. "Vivian, this is Scott." Scott extended his hand. "It's nice to finally meet you." She shook his hand gently. "The same." There was nothing flashy about him. No expensive speech, no attempt to impress her. If she had passed him on the street without knowing who he was, she would have simply thought he was a respectful businessman. Vivian looked toward her attorney. "You said someone helped make this review possible." "I did." He nodded toward Scott. "He financed it." Vivian looked back at Scott, clearly surprised. "You did?" Scott nodded once. "Yes." She hesitated before asking the question that had been sitting in her heart ever since the phone call. "Why?" Scott answered without hesitation. "Because the facts didn't make sense." She waited for more. None came. "You don't even know me." "No. So why spend your time and your money on a stranger?" Scott folded his hands comfortably. "I wasn't looking for a stranger." Vivian looked confused. "I was looking for the truth." The room became quiet. No one rushed to fill the silence. Finally, Scott continued, "I've spent years making business decisions. I've learned something. When different people who have nothing to gain all describe the same person's character, I pay attention. You were described as honest by volunteers, by counselors, by women whose lives you helped. That didn't match the records I read." Vivian lowered her eyes. "So you decided to check." "I decided the evidence deserved another careful review." Her attorney opened one of the folders. "I think it's time we show you what that review found." He spread several documents across the conference table. One page showed the timeline of financial transactions. Another compared business filings. Another listed account activity connected to Anderson. Her attorney pointed carefully. "Notice these dates?" Vivian leaned closer. "You were working full shifts at your office when several important documents were supposedly signed somewhere else." She looked from one page to another. "That's impossible." "Exactly." Another page showed how funds moved after the paperwork had been completed. Her attorney traced the path with his finger. The money consistently ended up benefiting businesses connected to Anderson. Vivian stared at the records. She remembered every time Anderson had told her not to worry. Every time he had said he would handle it. Every late meeting. Every envelope she never questioned. Scott spoke quietly. "We also found documents that should have received much closer attention during the original case." Vivian looked at him. "So, people finally looked at everything?" "They did." "And what happens now?" Her attorney smiled for the first time since she had entered the room. "We formally ask the court to reopen your case using this new evidence." Vivian took a slow breath. "So there's really a chance." "There is." She closed the folder gently. Not because the fight was over, because for the first time since walking into that Dallas County courtroom, she believed the truth finally had a voice strong enough to be heard. As they left the conference room together, Scott held the door open for Vivian. She smiled. "Thank you." He returned the smile. "You don't owe me thanks." She looked at him with quiet curiosity. "Maybe not. But I won't forget that someone I had never met chose to believe the facts instead of the rumors." Scott nodded respectfully. "I believe everyone deserves that." Neither of them realized it yet, but that simple conversation had become the first page of a completely new chapter in both of their lives. The day Vivian returned to court, she did not walk in with the same fear she carried before. She still felt nervous. Her hand still tightened around the edge of her folder. But this time, the truth had evidence beside it. Scott sat quietly behind her, not close enough to draw attention, but close enough for Vivian to know she was no longer standing alone. Her attorney placed the newly reviewed documents before the court. Dates were shown clearly, records were compared carefully, the transactions that once seemed to point at Vivian now led in another direction. Anderson's name appeared again and again. Vivian sat still as the truth finally received the attention it had been denied. When the court cleared her name and overturned the conviction, she did not shout. She covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes filled with tears. For a few seconds, all she could do was breathe. Outside the courthouse, her community waited. The moment Vivian stepped through the doors, people rushed toward her. Church members hugged her, neighbors cried openly. Someone started clapping, and soon the sound spread across the sidewalk. One older woman held Vivian's face gently. "I told you your name would come back clean." Vivian laughed through tears. "You said it every week. And I meant it every week. Scott stood a short distance away, watching quietly. No one cared about cameras. No one cared about wealth. They only cared that Vivian had been given back something money could not buy. Her name. Later that afternoon, Scott approached her carefully. I know today has been a lot, he said. Vivian smiled. That is one way to say it. I wanted to ask if you would let me take you to lunch. She raised an eyebrow. A billionaire lunch? He chuckled. Actually, I was thinking barbecue. Barbecue? I asked where people in Dallas go when they want real food and honest conversation. Vivian laughed. Now that sounds dangerous. People take barbecue seriously here. I'm prepared. You say that now. They went to a neighborhood restaurant where the tables were simple, the sauce was rich, and the peach cobbler disappeared faster than Scott expected. Vivian watched him take his first bite. Well? Scott paused. I understand why nobody suggested the private club. She laughed freely, and he found himself smiling before he could stop it. For the first time, they talked without court files between them. Scott told her about business dinners where people discussed numbers through entire meals. Vivian shook her head. That sounds exhausting. It can be. At our cookouts, people argue about potato salad like it's a national issue. That sounds better. It is better. Over the following months, Scott did not rush her. He did not treat her like a project. He showed up where help was needed. At food drives, he carried boxes. At church events, he stacked chairs. At community tables, he listened more than he spoke. One afternoon, Vivian watched him struggle with a heavy box of canned goods. You know, she teased, for a billionaire, you carry beans very seriously. Scott adjusted the box. I respect the beans. She laughed. Good answer. Little by little, friendship became comfort. Comfort became trust. Trust became something Vivian had not expected to feel again. One evening after a food drive, Scott walked her to her car. You looked happy today, he said. I was. I like seeing that. Vivian smiled softly. I'm learning to like it again. He reached for her hand slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their fingers joined quietly under the Dallas evening sky. No grand speech, no pressure, just peace. And for Vivian, peace felt like the beginning of love. The court's decision did more than restore Vivian's name. It also opened the door for the truth to reach the person who had worked so hard to hide it. As the records continued to be reviewed, the financial trail became impossible to ignore. The businesses that had quietly benefited from the false paperwork all connected back to Anderson. The documents that once appeared to blame Vivian now revealed who had truly gained from every dishonest decision. The legal process followed the evidence. Anderson was held responsible for the financial harm he had caused. He was ordered to repay what he had wrongfully obtained, and the businesses built on those dishonest transactions could no longer continue as they had before. The success he had chased without integrity slipped away through the same records he believed would always protect him. When someone asked Vivian if hearing the news made her happy, she paused before answering. I wanted the truth, she said calmly, not revenge. The person looked surprised. After everything he did? Vivian nodded. If I spend the rest of my life carrying bitterness, he still controls part of my future. I won't give him that. Scott stood nearby and heard every word. He admired her even more, not because she ignored the pain, but because she refused to let pain decide the kind of person she would become. Life slowly found a new rhythm. Scott and Vivian continued serving together at neighborhood events, church food drives, and community programs. The more time they spent together, the more natural their conversations became. They laughed, easily, respected each other's values, and never felt the need to pretend. One Saturday afternoon, another neighborhood cookout brought families together. Children chased one another across the park. Music floated through the air. The smell of barbecue filled the picnic area. Several church mothers smiled knowingly each time Scott and Vivian walked past together. One of them laughed. You two spend an awful lot of time carrying folding tables. Scott grinned. They're heavier than they look. Vivian smiled. They've been saying that for months. As the afternoon settled into evening, Scott looked at Vivian. Would you take a walk with me? Of course. They strolled toward a quiet corner of the park where they could still hear children laughing in the distance. Scott stopped walking. For the first time since Vivian had met him, he looked genuinely nervous. I've negotiated business agreements worth millions of dollars. Vivian smiled. I've heard. But this. He laughed softly. This feels much bigger. She looked at him with gentle curiosity. What is it? Scott reached into his jacket pocket and held out a small ring. I didn't fall in love with you because I rescued you. I fell in love with the woman who never stopped choosing kindness. Even when life gave her every reason to stop. The woman who helped people while carrying her own burdens. The woman who reminded me that success means very little if you have no one to share a peaceful life with. He took a steady breath. Vivian, will you marry me? Tears filled her eyes almost instantly. She laughed through them. "I've been hoping you would ask. Yes, I'll marry you." Before Scott could even place the ring on her finger, applause broke out behind them. The church mothers had noticed everything. One called out with a laugh, "We've been waiting long enough." Everyone burst into laughter. Vivian hugged Scott tightly as friends and neighbors gathered around. Them with congratulations. Their wedding several months later reflected both of their worlds. Her church family filled the room with music, warm embraces, and joyful celebration. Scott's longtime business associates attended with genuine respect, discovering the close community that had shaped the woman he loved. Neighbors shared tables with executives. Children laughed together outside. No one cared who had the largest bank account. Everyone celebrated two people whose lives had been brought together through truth, patience, and compassion. Years later, Vivian directed a nonprofit financial education center that helped families avoid fraud, understand budgeting, and rebuild confidence after difficult seasons. Scott continued leading his companies, but he found his greatest satisfaction supporting work that strengthened ordinary families and local communities. Together, they proved that wealth can create opportunities, but character determines how those opportunities are used. Their journey reminded everyone that truth may take time, but it is always worth pursuing. Honesty builds what deception cannot. Kindness remains powerful. And sometimes the greatest blessing arrives because one person chooses to look beyond appearances and believe the facts. Thank you for spending this time with us on Love, Money, and Secret. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and tell us in the comments which life lesson stayed with you the most. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another inspiring story of love, hope, justice, and second chances. Until next time, may peace, wisdom, and kindness guide every step you take.